Good afternoon, everyone. We've got some exciting programming to start this noontime session at the Stacks conference. Right now, we're going to be talking with Ms. Wertheimer and the rest of our panelists about DeFi on Bitcoin. We've got some really interesting perspectives on whether Bitcoin is most useful as an asset or as, the platform upon which we're going to build decentralized financial economies. So our panelists here, if everyone could just, introduce themselves or their pseudonyms. Let's go down the line.
So hello everyone, my name is Pieter. I'm a core contributor at Arkadiko Finance. It's a decentralized finance protocol on the Stacks blockchain. We offer self-repaying loans. We are an over-collateralized stablecoin where you can use your stacked STX tokens to collateralize them in a vault, mint a stablecoin called USDA, and get some extra liquidity to participate in the growing DeFi ecosystem on Stacks.
Okay, great. My name is Hadan. I'm the community growth lead with the Alex Foundation. Alex is the first complete DeFi protocol for Bitcoin. You can bring your liquidity to Alex to participate in IDOs, to exchange tokens on high liquidity dexes. We have exciting staking and yield farming rewards available with many more features coming in the future.
My name is Mason. I'm the CEO of okensoft. At okensoft, we do a lot of token sales, and we also run wrap.com, where we're bringing wrapped assets to Stacks. And so far, we've launched assets like xBTC and xUSD, which we're really excited to support.
My name is Udi Wertheimer. Some of you might know me, unfortunately, as Udiverse on Twitter. I've been talking about Bitcoin for years, so I came here to talk about Bitcoin again.
Hi, I'm Eric Wall. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of a very small Scandinavian cryptocurrency fund. Yeah, that's it.
And we'll start off with Pieter, actually, because you're building on top of Bitcoin through Stacks. Why the decision to try to build a DeFi platform on the Bitcoin standard?
Yeah, so I think Bitcoin is really a great asset. It's maybe the best asset in the world.
All right, well, come on. We've got a pro-Bitcoin crowd. Let's get something more interesting.
Definitely. And yeah, I just think Stacks has this really unique relationship with Bitcoin, given that it can read into the Bitcoin state and react from its applications, from its smart contracts on what happens on the Bitcoin blockchain. I think that's really powerful and a dynamic we haven't seen yet in the blockchain world. So that kind of made it so we wanted to build something on Stacks, and it wasn't actually that much around when we started building this, actually really nothing. And like one of the only primitives that was there was the stacking of STX tokens, which have a yield, yearly yield. And we just thought, what could this ecosystem need at the start? So we decided to build a building block for a growing DeFi ecosystem, which is where you need extra liquidity at the start. So you can get that against your assets, against your stacked STX tokens, or against xBTC, which is the wrapped version of Bitcoin by okensoft. And ultimately, yeah, we're very excited about unlocking native Bitcoin in the future. I think there's some technical challenges for that, but if that gets ironed out, I think there's a massive liquidity possibility coming to Stacks DeFi, and we want to be ready for that.
And Udi, is all this necessary? Do we need to have DeFi on top of Bitcoin, or is the asset itself enough?
Yeah, so do we need DeFi on top of Bitcoin? I think, I think what's interesting for Bitcoiners is to use Bitcoin as an asset however they want, right? And whether or not it's on Bitcoin, I mean, maybe that's the better service, maybe it's not. I'm in favor of building for Bitcoiners and giving Bitcoiners what they want as a service. If that ends up being on Bitcoin, that's awesome. If not, that's awesome too.
Mason, tell us about where okensoft is in all of this.
We're helping bring, so for any sort of like new DeFi ecosystem, there's going to be different types of DeFi applications like Arkadiko or Alex. And to sort of power those ecosystems, you need assets and liquidity. And so through wrap.com, we've rolled out xBTC and xUSD to bring those assets, number one, and to provide sort of a bridge for that liquidity to come in and for people to actually be able to use these different DeFi apps on Stacks.
And Hadan,
sure.
With Alex, how is Alex fitting into this ecosystem, like within the Stacks, within Bitcoin? DeFi?
Sure, and so Bitcoin by design is the most valuable block space in existence. And I would argue that we are not only winning, but we have won the sound money argument.
Okay.
Well, the narrative we aren't winning yet is on the smart contract narrative, by which I mean all the DeFis, all the NFTs, which are overwhelmingly on other chains. And so Bitcoin is extremely underutilized as a settlement layer at the moment. If you think about it daily, there are tens of billions of dollars in stablecoin settlements alone that should be settling on Bitcoin but aren't. And even in terms of the longevity of Bitcoin, Munib has discussed this on a podcast, but in 20 to 25 years, the coin rewards will be so low that you have to incentivize miners through higher transaction fees. And what is the natural product market fit for those high fees? It's not going to be individuals doing send and receive transactions. It's likely going to be financial institutions. Coming from a financial background myself, every day there are trillions of dollars in FX transactions, in equities, in mortgage settlements, in derivatives and credit default swaps that currently settle on these institutions like ACH in the US, and London they use CHAPS. But these independent third parties, at the end of the day, are centralized entities. You're placing your trust in people, and that's not where you want to be placing your trust. Through Bitcoin, through stacks, you're placing your trust in code. And so being able to bring onto Bitcoin and make it the gold standard to settle these very high value transactions really opens up an enormous opportunity. And I think it's really, as Munib has pointed out, on Ethereum you have a 500 billion market cap and 500 billion in apps. In Bitcoin you have almost a 1 trillion market cap, but very few in apps. And so it's the biggest opportunity in crypto space, in my opinion.
Well, to be the devil's advocate for a second, I'm not convinced that Bitcoin needs to have this aspect of it. I'll use the word exploited, I don't mean it in a negative term, but we have the Ethereum ecosystem, we have other chains. Those are, in at least they attempt to be optimized to create these economies. And Bitcoin, for most of its existence, has not been used in that way.
Right.
Why is it necessary to pursue this, to treat the block space as a commodity that you're going to build this whole financial future on top of?
It's essential to pursue because the medium of exchange is more than monetary value. It's also information. That's really clutch. The reason that this gap exists in terms of Bitcoin being behind on the smart contract narrative is because Bitcoin as a layer 1 does not support smart contract protocols. We've had to build layering solutions such as stacks in order to make that accessible. And so the reason particularly, if you believe in the mission of DeFi, in the mission of really decentralizing the control of finance from big central banks to individuals, to not only sovereign individuals, but sovereign collectives, then you need to be able to make those sorts of financial tools accessible on Bitcoin through layering solutions such as stacks. And so that's what projects like Alex are just prototyping now, with settling large volumes of financial transactions on the most secure layer that's in existence.
And Eric, where do you stand on all of this?
Well, I think there's two reasons to do DeFi on Bitcoin. The first one would be to do DeFi without introducing a new layer 1 asset. Like you want to do DeFi without introducing ETH or Avalanche. But in most of the cases, when we see people trying to do DeFi on Bitcoin, there is another token. There's the Stacks token, or on the rootstock blockchain, there's the RIF token. So in most cases, when people are trying to do DeFi on Bitcoin, they still introduce another token, which kind of defeats one of the purposes. The other reason to do DeFi on Bitcoin is that you want the Bitcoin miners to secure the order of transactions. But there's an inherent conflict there, because if you want the Bitcoin miners to secure the order of DeFi, then it means that the miners now have an economical incentive to order those transactions in a particular way. So there's tons of Bitcoiners who don't think that you should be doing DeFi on Bitcoin because it reorganizes the incentives for miners to have incentives to reorg the chain. So there's tons of people out there, there's tons of Bitcoin maximalists who don't think you should attach any DeFi incentives to the existing mining game theory. And until that conflict is resolved, once you've decided should Bitcoin be the chain that's responsible for organizing DeFi, before you have established a community consensus whether or not that's something you want to do, then I think you're running into a conflict where you're going to meet tons of resistance from Bitcoiners where they say, we don't want this on the chain because it creates unstable incentives for the ordering mechanism.
So what you're saying here is not just that this is a question of how you're utilizing Bitcoin, it's a question of philosophically, what is Bitcoin's purpose? And with Bitcoin just being used as the asset, we could say Bitcoin with a lowercase b versus Bitcoin the chain, and how to utilize it beyond the asset with an uppercase b. I could see a world where this drives a wedge between those two camps, and I'm interested in hearing from all of you, where does this leave the community? This is our hosts discussed how this could be the year of DeFi on Bitcoin. If it is, then we might have to grapple with some deeper philosophical questions. Mason.
Yeah, I think like for me from the beginning, the narrative around the Bitcoin camp was, okay, there's going to be all these different chains, and so whatever works best on the other chains, we'll just be able to adapt into the code and make sure Bitcoin is superior. And I think we've sort of seen a few different attempts at trying to do what Stacks has done with sidechains and with Lightning. And I think Stacks has actually accomplished anchoring a sort of another layer into Bitcoin for the first time and enabled sort of a full DeFi ecosystem where you can do anything. And so it's like finally that narrative sort of like came all around. And now all these things that you can do on different chains, you actually can do on Bitcoin using Stacks.
Uri?
Yeah, I think that we've always said those two things, right? One, whatever we see in other places we're going to take and adopt. And two, we always say we're going to build in layers. So I think something like Stacks makes sense is a way to build in layers. And really any chain where you can use Bitcoin can be seen as a layer that people use Bitcoin with. I also think, on the point of introducing new assets and new coins and what that maybe means for Bitcoiners, the good news is there's almost always a way to build apps on something like Stacks and really on anything in a way that you could use the Bitcoin asset and not directly pay for the fees. You can have someone else pay for the fees for you and have the fees kind of be subsidized by the Bitcoin that you're holding. So if Bitcoiners care about that, and I think a lot of them do, there's a way to make it better with any other chain and with Stacks.
And that question about what Bitcoin's place is, are we going to use the chain and we're going to use the technology to create DeFi, or at the same time we're seeing DeFi protocols, we're seeing other chains embrace Bitcoin as something that is worth backing up their ecosystems on top of. For example, UST and Luna, they're buying up Bitcoin. Terra's buying up Bitcoin to make them to serve as the backstop for a stablecoin. It's fascinating to see these worlds colliding.
Me?
Yes, you.
The
you have
guy
an
with the hair.
Perspective to all that.
Yeah, I think that the thing with what happened with Terra Luna, the usage of Bitcoin just makes sense for the use case. I'm not making any judgment call on how the UST stablecoin is going to perform long term. I don't know, but I think that the usage of Bitcoin makes a lot of sense when you realize how their mechanism worked before they adopted Bitcoin. So I think that's big news to anyone who cares about the usage of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is just a good reserve asset for all types of protocols and all types of apps, and it can be on anywhere on the spectrum between being completely decentralized to being completely centralized. It's useful for institutions that would like to buy Bitcoin, put it on their balance sheet, which we probably would call centralized, and maybe to nation states in the same way, but it also is useful for decentralized protocols. And I think that's great news for anyone who cares about the usage of Bitcoin. It shows that Bitcoin is useful for a lot of things that we didn't think about before.
And Hadan, I think there's a messaging question here as well, right? Like, first we have to bring the world, convince the world on the proposition that Bitcoin is trustworthy, is useful, is that
Right.
This is an order of magnitude more complicated. It's like first you need that premise, and then if you have accepted that as a truth, then we're going to start building DeFi on top of it.
Right.
Are we ready for that messaging campaign? I don't think we are.
Alex is ready. If there's one message that I'd like everyone to take away is that Bitcoin does not need DeFi. Bitcoin existed before DeFi. If DeFi ever disappears, Bitcoin will still exist. But DeFi needs Bitcoin. You are not going to see the mass adoption of DeFi without the security that Bitcoin provides, without the transparency that Clarity Code provides, where you're broadcasting into the Bitcoin state in decipherable language, the code that's being executed, versus Solidity, where you're broadcasting hexadecimal machine code into the blockchain state. And so, first and foremost, that's really at the core of what DeFi on Bitcoin provides. It's about, even in financial services, to see institutional investors on board. It comes down to a core message of security, it comes down to transparency, and it comes down to making smart contracts accessible and making Bitcoin a programmable asset, which extends its functionality, which extends its usability. And we're just at the dawn of where that's going. And so, whereas everyone is wondering what the next Bitcoin is going to be, Bitcoin DeFi is going to be the next Bitcoin, because finance will always overtake currency. There's $1 trillion in US currency in circulation. National debt alone is close to $30 trillion. That's discounting personal debt, corporate debt. And why is that? Because there is an asset that's more valuable than Bitcoin, and that asset is time. And what does finance do? Finance is essentially creating or determining what the time value of Bitcoin is. It's turning it into a productive asset. It's allowing you to determine your own risk-reward perspective. It's allowing these sovereign collectives to create their own yield curve that will rival the Fed yield curve, that will rival LIBOR. And that's where you see a true flippening occur. And I don't mean the flippening where Bitcoin DeFi flips Ethereum DeFi. I mean the flippening where DeFi takes its rightful place as the global reserve currency and supplants the US dollar. Because again, in code we trust, not in people, not in institutions, not in governments.
Now, Peter, if I'm a central banker or someone in the government and I just hear that, I don't know if I'm scared or if I'm thinking, oh, well, that's a load of bullshit. How do we convince people of this?
Yeah, so I think you have to start out with convincing people that Bitcoin has value and that within the crypto ecosystem, it's one of the lowest risk assets to be in. And that the future of Bitcoin, how it can create more use cases, is definitely going to be a layered future. I don't think we should put too much, we need to change the Bitcoin protocol at all. It just needs to be this dumb and reliable protocol with the same game theory we've had in the past. But we can build layers on top of that. For example, Stacks is one approach. And we can experiment there. We're much more flexible on Stacks than we are on Bitcoin. So I think using the Bitcoin assets in DeFi is definitely where this is going, and how the regulator and how central banks are viewing this. I'm not a central banker, so I wouldn't really know. I hope they're trying to keep an open mind about these things, and we see different jurisdictions react in different ways to all of this. But yeah, as with everything in the crypto space, definitely DeFi happening on Stacks is kind of an experiment, and we'll have to see what the future brings to really know and draw conclusions on what would be best.
And Eric, how do we make sure that this experiment doesn't blow up in our faces?
Sorry?
How do we make sure this experiment doesn't blow up in our faces?
How do we make sure the experiment doesn't blow up?
The experiment of DeFi on Bitcoin.
Well, I don't think that there's that big of a risk of this. I mean, something like Terra, something like Luna, that's might be a risk, but in general, I wouldn't say DeFi on Bitcoin is that big of a risk. I think that there's tons of Bitcoin maximalists out there who are afraid to introduce other incentives on top of Bitcoin. because, like I said, it creates reorganization incentives. But I think that the bigger risk for Bitcoin is that the chain doesn't attract enough transaction fees to sustainably secure the chain long term. So we need more complex applications to run on top of Bitcoin so that the miners have a security budget to work for that aren't just coming from the block rewards, because it's going to take a couple of decades, and then the mining rewards are going to be very small from Bitcoin's natural emissions. So we need some type of DeFi activity linked to Bitcoin mining so that miners have a reason to keep mining the chain. So I think that applications like stacks, drive chains, ZK rollups, all those things increases the revenue for miners, and it's going to add security for Bitcoin. But there's two intellectual camps there. There are some that are afraid about this, and there are some that see it as an absolute necessity. So I think that if any point in time we should start experimenting with this now and not discover the problem much later down the road as a fundamental issue for Bitcoin. I think this is a time to experiment and explore those different avenues.
And Mason, do you think this is an absolute necessity, or do you think that it's a nice to have?
I think there's two things. So one is we've seen the transaction fees drop off a cliff, and I think that just shows less demand, and so that I don't think that bodes well for Bitcoin long term. I think the other thing is it's very helpful for me as a user of these different DeFi applications to have all the transactions anchored in Bitcoin. It just lets me have more trust and more comfort in using my assets and putting them to work. And so I sort of see that as a huge positive as well, and I'm happy to see it.
Awesome, and I'd love to save some time now for audience questions if anyone has any questions on how this all fits together. Do we have a microphone? 1 second.
So kudos to you all. I believe that you all are pioneering the next frontier and evolution of the monetary world as we know it as it transitions. So thank you for that. I know most people who go through the door first, they often get hit with bullets and tomatoes and all of that. So the resiliency is truly admirable. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that. My question is, within the next 2 or 3 years, where do you see BitFi or Bitcoin DeFi going?
Udi?
I would expect to see Bitcoin DeFi, meaning DeFi that uses the Bitcoin asset everywhere.
In 2 to 3 years?
Was that?
In 2 years?
Yeah. I mean, we already see it. So people already use Bitcoin and DeFi, mostly on Ethereum. And I would expect that this will not stay on Ethereum. I would expect that it will go anywhere. So yeah, that's my main expectation.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe I can add on to that.
Sure.
So I think we've seen Bitcoin's usage across DeFi. It's actually on every chain in a wrapped version of it. So it has liquidity on every chain. It's obviously an asset people want to use in DeFi. As for DeFi on stacks and on Bitcoin by extension, I think we're definitely going to see more protocols pop up and use the foundations that us and Alex have built for them, as we've really laid out the groundwork for other developers, other applications to more easily make it through. So it's just just time that we need, I think, to onboard more developers, more protocols, more liquidity. It's kind of growing out from here, but I think all the infrastructure is, not everything, but most of the infrastructure is built out on stacks. And I'm very, very positive on it for the future.
Thank you. Keep going.
Appreciate all you guys coming today. My question is about Alex Go, and I know recently you've introduced a dual yield with Alex and USDC. Are there any other plans to maybe have a dual yield with any other crypto product, Bitcoin and the like? And also, I'd like to know where Udi got his hair growth product. I'm obviously needs.
Let's start with a question about Alex.
Sure. And so the basis on which we might have other dual yield token pools will be on a project by project basis. You know, it really comes down to having those conversations, designing those collaborations, seeing what makes sense for both parties, really. You know, like Alex, in a sense, already has almost a dual yield, because as a staker or yield farmer, you receive both Alex as well as A-Power. A-Power is a non-tradable, non-transferable token, but you need it to access IDOs on our platform. And that means that projects that come to IDO on Alex know that they're being connected with our core community of people with a proven track record of being stakers and yield farmers and really holders. And so, yeah, as far as other projects in the future, it'll really see, it has to make sense for token utility, it has to make sense on the tokenomics. You know, it isn't just a vanity affair. But yeah, we look forward to really embracing, forming stronger bonds and partnerships. And you know, our vision is that a rising tide lifts all ships. So. And
I can answer the Udi question for him. He usually wears a bald cap, and this is his natural hair.
This is a new shampoo, really.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
Next question, anyone?
We spoke about it just a little bit, some areas of regulation and concern. We're obviously in a little bit of a gray area now in DeFi specifically. From your guys' perspectives, is there any regulation that you hope to see, or you know, if any, that might be instructive or useful? Yeah.
Mason?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, if we go back to like 2017, 2018, I think the regulators got to a point where they sort of like choked the space and all the activity moved offshore. And so now the activity is very vibrant. A lot of people are operating offshore now. And I don't think like what regulations would we like to see? Like we'd like to see a little bit of clarity so everyone can operate domestically. And I think people are still afraid to do that. And I'm not getting the feeling that the regulators have something like that coming up. I think like one great model that works is a sandbox model, where regulators sort of work more closely with projects. Maybe they could get to, I don't know, 100 million TVL before like they have to get licensed. And there's a little bit of learning happening, because I think a lot of this is just regulators not completely understanding exactly what's happening at the bottom. And there has to be a little comfort from the startups and their lawyers, which is where all this comes from, in terms of working domestically here in the US as well.
Hi, this is for our Scandinavia. What has been the appetite since COVID for crypto in Scandinavia, as well as the name of your crypto fund? And do you see more appetite building now?
I mean, Scandinavia, unfortunately, is going to be the last place on earth that of people that are actually going to understand the prospect of Bitcoin, sadly. It comes from the fact that we have very high trust in our institutions. Our institutions have worked for a long time. I've been in the Scandinavian crypto industry for 10 years, and just getting regular people to understand the value proposition of a decentralized, self-sovereign currency is just very difficult. So I think that, you know, looking to Scandinavia, meanwhile Scandinavia has been a leader in technology in many areas, like music. It's just not happening for crypto. My recommendation is forget about Scandinavia for a while. Check back in a couple of years, see if they've got it. Sorry.
Oh, to live in a country where it's unfortunate for people to have high trust in their institutions. I can't imagine. Any more questions? No? All right, well then let's wrap up. Thank you guys so much for listening. It's exciting to see what the future holds for, what is it, BitFi? What are we calling it? Or DeFi on Bitcoin? Yeah, DeFi on Bitcoin, we'll keep it long. No more acronyms. All right, thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.